Dad toasted. You will clear your brother's $80,000 debt. Mom added coldly. Say no and you're disowned. I smiled and tapped my glass. Then this is my final toast. You get nothing. My name is Nadine Prescott. I am 31 years old, a senior project manager for a logistics firm, and, apparently, my family's personal automated teller machine. I just didn't fully realize the extent of that last job title until New Year's Eve. I was sitting in my 2015 Honda Civic, parked half a block away from my parents' house. The engine was off, and the bitter December cold was already seeping through the floorboards, chilling my feet. I had my hands wrapped tightly around the steering wheel, just staring out through the frosty windshield at the sprawling, two-story colonial homes that lined their suburban street. Every driveway was filled with shiny, expensive cars. Mercedes, BMWs, a few oversized SUVs that looked like they belonged in a motorcade. And then there was my little silver Civic, parked discreetly in the shadows so it would not ruin the aesthetic of their wealthy neighborhood. I looked down at the sleeve of my winter coat. There was a tiny, neat patch near the cuff where I had stitched up a tear a few weeks ago. I make a six-figure salary. I could easily afford a new coat. I could easily afford a new car. But when you spend your entire adult life waiting for the next financial emergency from your family, you learn to hoard your money like a survivalist. You patch your coats. You drive the reliable car until the wheels fall off. Because you know that eventually, the phone is going to ring and someone is going to need a bailout. That someone was almost always my younger brother, Julian. Julian is 28, but if you looked at how my parents treated him, you would think he was a fragile teenager who needed constant supervision. Julian was the golden child. The boy who was supposed to be a brilliant entrepreneur. The boy who was given a brand new car for his high school graduation while I took out federal loans to pay for my own college tuition. As I sat there freezing in my car, I felt that familiar, heavy dread settling in my stomach. I hated these holiday dinners. My parents, Richard and Margaret, were obsessed with appearances. They belonged to the local country club, they hosted lavish parties, and they cared more about what their neighbors thought than almost anything else on earth. Going inside meant I was going to have to put on a fake smile, sip overly dry champagne, and pretend that we were a perfectly happy, functional family. But beneath the surface, I knew something was wrong. Julian had been quiet lately. Too quiet. For the past few months, his social media had gone dark. He had stopped bragging about his latest business venture, a boutique fitness gym that he swore was going to revolutionize the industry. My mother had been sending me cryptic texts all week, telling me how stressed my father was, and how we all needed to be supportive of Julian during this transitional period. Whenever my mother used the phrase transitional period, it usually meant someone was about to ask me for a check. I took a deep breath, watching the condensation of my breath hit the cold glass. I told myself I was overreacting. It was New Year's Eve. Maybe they just wanted to have a nice dinner. Maybe, for once, I could just be a daughter and not the family crisis manager. I checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, grabbed my purse, and stepped out into the freezing night. I had no idea that I was about to walk into the most expensive ambush of my life. The moment I pushed open the heavy oak front door, I was hit by a wall of warm air and the suffocating scent of my mother's expensive vanilla candles mixed with roasting beef. The house was immaculate. Gold and white decorations everywhere, reflecting the soft, warm light of the crystal chandelier in the foyer. Aunt Sylvia was the first person I saw. She was hovering by the coat rack, nursing a glass of red wine, wearing a dress that was a little too tight and a smile that was a little too sharp. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my practical winter boots before settling on my face. "Nadine, darling. You made it," she practically purred. We were starting to wonder. "Still working those crazy hours? You really need to make time to find a nice man, sweetheart. You cannot just marry your career." "Happy New Year to you too, Aunt Sylvia," I replied evenly, handing her my patched coat with zero shame. I had learned a long time ago not to engage with her passive-aggressive bait. I moved past her into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of country club pretension. Polished silver, crystal glasses, perfectly folded linen napkins. My mother, Margaret, was directing the caterers because of course she hired caterers for a family dinner with the precision of a military general. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Nadine, you look very comfortable, dear," she said, giving me a brief, stiff hug. "Come sit down. We are almost ready to serve." I took my assigned seat. Across the table sat Julian. He looked terrible. The golden boy was pale, there were dark circles under his eyes, and he was aggressively avoiding my gaze. He was staring down at his empty plate like it held the secrets to the universe. He looked physically sick. My father, Richard, walked into the room carrying a bottle of very expensive champagne. He was wearing a tailored suit, looking every bit the successful patriarch he desperately wanted everyone to believe he was. He was aggressively cheerful, clapping my uncle on the shoulder, laughing loudly at a joke I did not hear. But as the dinner progressed, the tension in the room became unbearable. It was like sitting in a beautifully decorated room that was slowly filling with gas. My parents were being entirely too nice to me. My father complimented my recent promotion at the logistics firm, something he had barely acknowledged when it actually happened 3 months ago. My mother asked about my apartment and told Aunt Sylvia how proud they were of my financial independence. Every compliment felt like a tripwire. I kept nodding, eating the expensive food, and observing. That is what project managers do. We analyze the environment. And my environment was screaming at me. Then I saw it. Resting on the buffet table, dangerously close to where my father was sitting, was a thick, brown manila folder. It was entirely out of place among the silver platters and crystal bowls. My father kept glancing at it. Every time he did, Julian would flinch slightly and take another gulp of wine. The fake joy, the excessive compliments, the nervous brother, the mysterious folder. The math was starting to add up in my head, and the total was making my blood run cold. They were softening me up. This was not a celebration. It was a business pitch, and I was the reluctant investor they were trying to corner. Dessert had been cleared. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times. We were an hour away from midnight. My father stood up at the head of the table, clearing his throat loudly. He picked up his champagne glass, and the dull roar of family chatter immediately died down. "Family," my father began, his voice booming with practiced authority. "As we look toward the new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on what is truly important. Family is our foundation. It is our strength. And sometimes, family means stepping up when someone we love is going through a difficult time." I stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I looked at Julian. He had practically collapsed into his chair, his hands covering his face. My father reached over to the buffet table and picked up the brown manila folder. He held it like a sacred text. "As some of you may know," he continued, not looking at me yet, "Julian's business venture has faced some unexpected headwinds. The economic climate has been unforgiving." That was a very polite way of saying Julian's luxury gym had gone belly up because he spent the startup capital on a sports car and overpriced marketing consultants instead of actual gym equipment. My father finally turned his gaze directly to me. His expression was a bizarre mix of absolute entitlement and forced paternal warmth. "Julian is dealing with a significant liability. $80,000 to be exact. It is an overwhelming burden for a young man trying to find his way." He tossed the manila folder onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, sickening thud. "Inside this folder are the transfer of debt agreements," my father announced, his voice steady, as if he were simply reading the evening specials at a restaurant. "Starting this year, Nadine, you will be financially responsible for your brother's situation. You will clear his $80,000 debt. He is dealing with enough already, and as the older, more established sibling, it is your duty to carry this." The clink of a fork hitting a plate sounded like a gunshot. The entire table froze. Aunt Sylvia's mouth dropped open. My uncle stopped mid-sip. I just stared at him. $80,000. He was not asking me for a loan. He was not asking for help. He was ordering me to sign away $80,000 of my life savings to clean up a mess I had absolutely nothing to do with. Before I could even process the audacity of the demand, My mother, Margaret, leaned forward. Her face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. And let us be very clear, Nadine, my mother added coldly, her eyes boring into mine. This is not a debate. If you decide to say no, do not expect to be part of this family anymore. You can leave your keys on the counter. They had planned this. The dinner, the audience, the coordinated attack. They thought that by putting me on the spot in front of the extended family, the social pressure would force me to fold. They thought the threat of losing them would terrify me into compliance. But sitting there, looking at the two people who were supposed to protect me, treating me like a disposable bank account, I did not feel terror. I did not even feel anger. I felt a profound, absolute clarity. The fog of familial obligation just vanished. I picked up my champagne glass. The crystal felt cool and heavy in my hand. I looked at my mother's hard eyes, then at my father's expectant face, and finally at Julian, who still refused to look at me. I let out a slow, calm smile. I reached out and tapped my glass once against the side of my water goblet. A sharp, clear ding rang out through the suffocating silence of the dining room. Then let this be my final toast, I said. My voice was completely even, devoid of any shaking or tears. And the end of any money you will ever see from me. I did not wait for a reaction. I set the glass down, pushed my chair back, and stood up. I walked out of the dining room, grabbed my patched winter coat off the rack, and walked out the front door. The silence I left behind was absolute. No one yelled. No one followed me. The entire table remained frozen in complete, stunned silence. The cold air hit my face like a physical blow as I stepped out of the house, but I welcomed it. I practically power-walked to my Civic, my boots crunching loudly against the frosted pavement. I unlocked the car, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door shut. I sat there for a second in the dark, waiting for the adrenaline crash. I waited for the tears to come, for the panic of being disowned to wash over me. But nothing happened. My hands were perfectly steady as I put the key in the ignition. As I pulled away from the curb, leaving the giant, glowing houses behind, I switched my phone to Do Not Disturb and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The drive back to my apartment in the city took about 45 minutes. For the first 20 minutes, the only sound was the hum of my heater and the rhythmic thumping of the tires on the highway. But the silence in the car was constantly interrupted by visual noise. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my phone screen lighting up in the darkness of the passenger seat. Over and over again. It was a relentless strobe light of incoming notifications. I did not pick it up to read them, but the previews flashed large enough on the lock screen for me to catch fragments. Margaret, get back here right now. Margaret, you're embarrassing your father. Richard, we are not done talking about this. Margaret, you are being incredibly selfish. Julian is having a panic attack. Selfish. That was the word that kept flashing across the screen. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip loose on the steering wheel. It was fascinating, really, the psychological gymnastics they were performing. I had just refused to hand over $80,000 of money I had earned by working 60-hour weeks, and somehow, in their narrative, I was the villain attacking them. What struck me most during that drive was not the cruelty of the ultimatum, but the sheer, breathtaking entitlement of it. My father had presented the demand as if he were confirming a routine administrative task. Like asking me to pass the salt or pick up the dry cleaning. You will clear his debt. They truly believed that my success was a communal asset. They viewed my bank account as the family's emergency overflow tank. And why wouldn't they? For years, I had trained them to believe exactly that. Every time Julian screwed up, I was the one who quietly fixed it to spare my parents the stress. I had built the very monster that was currently blowing up my phone. But tonight was different. $80,000 was not a rent gap. It was not a missing car payment. It was a life-altering amount of money. It was the down payment for the house I wanted to buy. It was my security. They thought the threat of exile would break me. They did not realize that standing in that dining room, looking at the manila folder that was meant to sign my future away, I had already mentally packed my bags. The phone on the passenger seat finally stopped vibrating as I pulled into the underground parking garage of my apartment building. I turned off the engine, picked up the phone, and flipped it face down. Tomorrow, they were going to learn that I was not bluffing. And neither was the silence I planned to give them. I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped inside. It was dark, quiet, and wonderfully empty. No fake joy. No crystal glasses. Just my own space, paid for entirely by me. I did not bother turning on the main lights. I just kicked off my boots, hung my coat up, and walked into the living room, letting the streetlights filtering through the blinds illuminate the space. I sank onto my sofa, exhausted but wide awake. Being in this quiet room, fresh off a family explosion, brought up a ghost I tried very hard not to think about. 3 years ago, I had a fiancé. His name was Greg. We had a date set, a venue booked, and a joint savings account we affectionately called the Happily Ever After Fund. We were happy. We were building a life. And then, Julian got arrested. It was a driving under the influence charge, combined with some property damage. He had crashed his car into a storefront. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the legal fees, the bail, and the restitution settlements were enormous. My parents panicked. They could not let the country club find out their golden boy was facing jail time. They needed cash, fast, to keep it quiet and hire the best defense attorney in the state. They came to me crying. My mother collapsed in my arms, hyperventilating, saying Julian's life would be ruined, that he would never recover from a criminal record. They begged. They pleaded. They used every ounce of guilt they had installed in me since childhood. I broke. I went to the bank and wired $15,000 out of the wedding fund to my father. When Greg found out, we had the worst fight of our relationship. I told him it was an emergency, that it was just a temporary setback, that family comes first. Greg looked at me, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking pity. I will never forget what he said. He said, "Nadine, you are not marrying me. You are married to their chaos. I cannot build a future with a woman whose first allegiance is to a parasitic family." He packed his bags that night. The wedding was canceled. My parents told me it was for the best, that Greg clearly was not strong enough to handle real family loyalty. They never paid back the $15,000. Every time I brought it up, my mother would get teary-eyed and say, "We are just trying to get back on our feet, Nadine. Do you really have to be so transactional about family?" Sitting on my couch in the dark, the memory of Greg walking out the door burned in my chest. I had sacrificed the man I loved, the future I wanted, to protect Julian from the consequences of his own actions. And what was my reward? An $80,000 invoice served on New Year's Eve, accompanied by a threat of disownment. I pulled my knees to my chest. The pain of losing Greg had never truly gone away, but tonight it mutated into something else. It hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I had lost a marriage because of their entitlement. I was absolutely not going to lose my financial independence, too. I had paid my dues. I had bought my ticket out of this family 3 years ago with my own heartbreak. It was time to finally use it. The clock on the microwave read 2 in the morning, but sleep was a biological impossibility. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a hyper-focused, analytical energy. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, opened it, and logged into my bank's online portal. If my family wanted to treat my existence as a purely financial arrangement, then I was going to do the math. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I named the file the cash cow. Then I started digging through years of transaction history. It was nauseating work. I scrolled back through months and years, typing every transfer, every wire, every emergency payment I had made on behalf of my parents or Julian. There was the $3,000 for Julian's rent when he decided to quit his corporate job to find his passion. There was the $5,000 for a business coach when his passion turned out to be life coaching, which he failed at. There was the $15,000 for the legal fees that cost me my engagement. There were countless smaller transfers, 500 here, 800 there, always accompanied by a frantic text from my mother. "Just this once, Nadine. He is in a bind. We will pay you back on the 1st." The first of what month, what year, was never specified. I categorized them meticulously. Rent, legal, debt, business restart. Every time I entered a number, I thought about what I was doing when I earned that money. I thought about the holidays I worked through to get double pay. I thought about the vacations I skipped because I felt guilty spending money on myself when Julian was struggling. I thought about the 60-hour work weeks, the stress migraines, the sheer exhaustion of building a career while dragging the dead weight of my family's financial irresponsibility behind me. My parents always had an excuse for him. Julian's failures were never his fault. He was neurodivergent. He had anxiety. The economy was bad. His business partners betrayed him. Every failure was softened, cushioned, and explained away before the consequences could ever reach him. Meanwhile, my discipline, my hard work, my late nights, those were just expected. My mother used to tell her friends, "Nadine is our rock. She is so strong, she never needs help." What she really meant was, "Nadine is our safety net. We do not have to worry about the fall, because she will break it." I highlighted the final column and clicked the AutoSum button. The number popped up at the bottom of the screen. $124,600. Over the last 7 years, I had handed over more than $120,000 of my income to fund the illusion that Julian was a functional adult and my parents were successful people. I stared at the number until the screen went blurry. I did not cry. Crying implies sadness, a sense of loss. What I felt was a cold, clinical disgust. I closed the laptop with a soft click. The math was done. The ledger was closed. They had already taken my past. They were not getting 1 single cent of my future. What do you think of this figure of over $120,000? Before we dive into the stormy morning of New Year's Day and how Nadine confronts her mother, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to leave a comment with the name of the city or state you live in. Every comment is a huge motivation for the video to reach more people. Thank you so much. Now let's see what happens when the sun rises. New Year's Day started at exactly 9 in the morning with the sharp, aggressive buzzing of my apartment intercom. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee, watching the morning news on mute. I knew exactly who it was. I walked over to the security monitor by the door and hit the video button. Margaret was standing in the lobby, looking furiously up at the camera. She hit the buzzer again, leaning her entire body weight into it. I pressed the talk button. "I am not buzzing you up, Mom. Nadine Prescott, you let me up this instant or I will have the doorman use the emergency key." Her voice crackled through the cheap speaker, vibrating with poorly contained rage. I sighed, hit the unlock button, and unlocked my front door. I went back to my coffee. 2 minutes later, the door flew open. My mother marched into my apartment like a SWAT team clearing a building. She didn't take off her expensive wool coat. She kept her designer purse clutched tightly under her arm, an armor of luxury. She did not say hello. She did not offer a hug. Her eyes were sharp, darting around my living room before locking onto me. "Don't do this," she said, her voice dropping into that condescending, warning tone she used to use when I was a toddler reaching for a hot stove. "Do not be dramatic, Nadine. We are fixing this today." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "There is nothing to fix. I gave you my answer last night." She scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. She paced in front of the kitchen island. "Your brother did not sleep all night. Do you know that? He is spiraling. He was in the bathroom crying at 2 in the morning. Your father had to sit on the floor with him. And your father is embarrassed. Walking out like that. Do you have any idea how that looks? What Aunt Sylvia is going to tell the rest of the family?" There it was. The holy trinity of my mother's priorities, Julian's comfort, my father's ego, and the family's public image. Nowhere in that speech was a single word of concern for me. "I don't care what Aunt Sylvia thinks," I said calmly. "And I don't care how it looks. I am not paying his debt." My mother slammed her hand down on the granite countertop. "It is $80,000, Nadine. The bank is threatening to seize the equipment he bought for the gym. If he defaults, it ruins his credit. It ruins his life. You have the money. We know what you make." I have savings, I corrected her, keeping my voice dangerously level. Savings that I built by not blowing my money on stupid, failing businesses. I already paid his legal fees 3 years ago. I paid his rent. My savings are not an infinite slush fund for Julian's mistakes. Margaret stared at me for a long, quiet moment. Then she laughed. She actually laughed. It was a short, dry, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. "Oh, please," she sneered, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You make good money, Nadine. You are single. You have no dependents. You will recover. You will just work a few more hours, get another bonus. You will be fine." He won't. That sentence landed heavier than any insult she could have hurled at me. You will recover. He won't. It was the ultimate distillation of our family dynamic. I was the strong one, the resilient one, which meant my pain, my sacrifices, and my financial security simply did not matter. I was a resource that could be depleted because I had the ability to regenerate. Julian was the delicate flower that needed constant watering, even if it meant draining my well dry. I set my coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the granite. I stood up, looking my mother dead in the eye. "Get out." She blinked, momentarily stunned by the quiet authority in my voice. "Excuse me," I said. "Get out of my apartment." I pointed toward the open door. "I am not discussing this anymore. I am not paying the debt. If Julian is bankrupt, then he is bankrupt. That is how the real world works." "Nadine, if I walk out that door right now, you are making a permanent enemy of your family," she threatened, her face flushing red. "Mom," I said, my voice completely dead. "You just told me that my financial ruin is an acceptable price to pay for Julian's comfort. You are already my enemy. You just want me to keep paying you for the privilege. Now leave." She opened her mouth to scream, saw the absolute zero in my eyes, and snapped her jaw shut. She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on my wall rattled. I stood alone in the quiet apartment. The war had officially started. The afternoon of New Year's Day dragged on in a tense, heavy silence. I spent hours cleaning my spotless apartment, trying to burn off the residual adrenaline from kicking my mother out. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone finally rang. It was not my mother this time. The caller identification displayed Julian's name. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me, the old, conditioned part, wanted to answer immediately, to soothe him, to ask him what was wrong. But the new version of me, the one who had done the math and stared at the $124,000 deficit, just let it ring. It rang 3 times before I finally swiped the green button and put it on speakerphone, setting the device down on the coffee table. I didn't say a word. I just waited. "Nadine?" His voice was small, shaky, the auditory equivalent of a kicked puppy. "Are you there?" "I am here, Julian," I said, my voice flat. I heard a heavy, dramatic sigh crackle through the speaker. "I am in a really dark headspace right now, Nadine. Like, a really toxic place. Mom said you kicked her out. She said you are refusing to help me transition out of this business debt." Notice the language. He did not say, "pay my debt." He said, "help me transition." He was using therapy speak. It was a tactic he had perfected over the last 5 years. He weaponized psychological buzzwords to make himself the eternal victim. "It is not a transition, Julian," I replied, leaning back into my sofa. "It is an $80,000 commercial loan that you defaulted on. And no, I am not paying it." "You are traumatizing me right now," he said, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. "You are pulling your support system away when I am at my most vulnerable. I have time blindness, Nadine. I have severe executive dysfunction. You know how hard it is for me to manage these corporate structures. I tried to build something beautiful with that gym, and the economy just crushed me. And now you are punishing me for failing." "I am not punishing you," I said coldly. "I am simply not rescuing you. There is a massive difference." "But why are you doing this?" he pleaded, completely ignoring my point. "I am your brother. You are supposed to be a safe space for me. You make so much money, Nadine. You do not even have a family to support. Why are you hoarding your wealth when I am literally drowning?" That was the moment the final string snapped. He didn't view me as a person. I was just a vault of hoarded wealth that he felt entitled to access. He actually believed that because I chose not to have children, because I literally could not afford to get married after paying his legal fees 3 years ago, my money defaulted to him. Julian, I said, leaning closer to the phone. My savings account is not your safe space. My life is not your backup plan. You are 28 years old. You signed a commercial lease. You bought $70,000 worth of imported exercise bikes instead of paying your contractors. You made those choices. Now you get to survive them. You are being so toxic, he whispered, sounding genuinely offended. I cannot even talk to you right now. You are not respecting my healing journey. Good, I said softly. Then lose my number. I reached out and ended the call. Immediately, I went into my phone settings, selected his contact, and tapped block caller. I did the same for my mother and my father. For the first time in my adult life, I had completely severed the communication line. I sat back, expecting to feel a wave of guilt. Instead, I felt like I had just dropped a 100-pound backpack after hiking uphill for 7 years. By the morning of January 2nd, the quiet in my apartment was no longer comforting, it was strategic. I knew my parents. The silent treatment was not a surrender, it was a tactical retreat while they figured out a way to force my hand. If they could not manipulate me emotionally, they would try to corner me administratively. I took the day off work. At 9 in the morning, I walked through the heavy glass doors of my primary bank branch. I asked to speak with a senior account advisor. A woman named Clara, who looked to be in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tailored suit, invited me into her glass-walled office. "How can I help you today, Miss Prescott?" Clara asked, pulling up my profile on her monitor. "I need to audit every account associated with my social security number, freeze my credit completely, and revoke any authorized user statuses that might exist," I said, my voice all business. Clara paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She gave me a sharp, understanding look. "Identity theft?" "Family," I corrected her. Clara nodded slowly, her expression shifting to one of professional sympathy. "Say no more. Let us take a look." She clicked through several screens. The silence stretched for a minute before she frowned. "Miss Prescott, are you aware of a joint checking account opened at our suburban branch 12 years ago? It looks like a college student account. Your mother, Margaret Prescott, is listed as the primary custodian." My stomach dropped into my shoes. I had completely forgotten about that account. It was the one my parents set up for me when I was 19 to deposit my part-time bookstore wages. I had stopped using it a decade ago, assuming it had been closed due to inactivity. "Is it active?" I asked, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. Clara clicked the mouse again. "It has had a zero balance for 6 years. However, there was an attempted transaction this morning at 8:15. An overdraft request for $4,500. It was flagged and declined because the account lacks overdraft protection." $4,500. That was the exact amount of Julian's monthly apartment rent. Margaret had actually tried to overdraft an abandoned account with my name on it to keep a roof over her golden boy's head, entirely willing to let my credit score take the devastating hit. "Close it," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it felt like ice in my veins. "Close it right now. Remove my name from it. Lock everything down. Put a password on my main accounts. If anyone calls claiming to be me or claiming to be a family member with an emergency, decline them." Clara worked quickly and efficiently. Within 30 minutes, I had signed a stack of papers building an impenetrable financial fortress around my assets. But I was not done. Leaving the bank, I took a cab straight to a law firm downtown. I had an appointment with a financial attorney named Marcus. I walked into his office, slapped the manila folder from New Year's Eve, which I had snatched off the table before leaving, onto his desk. "I need a formal cease and desist letter drafted and delivered to my father, Richard Prescott," I told Marcus. "He presented me with these loan transfer documents 2 nights ago. I refused to sign. I have reason to believe he might attempt to forge my signature as a guarantor to save his son from bankruptcy." Marcus, a man who had clearly seen the absolute worst of human nature, flipped through the documents. He pointed to a specific clause on the third page. He already filled out your personal information here, Nadine. Social Security, employer, estimated income. All he needed was your ink on the bottom line. Seeing my private data written out in my father's neat handwriting made me physically sick. He had prepared the trap perfectly. Draft the letter, I instructed Marcus. Make it aggressive. Make it explicitly clear that any financial documents bearing my name submitted to Julian's creditors will be immediately forwarded to the district attorney as criminal fraud. By 3 p.m, the legal wall was built. I walked out of the law firm and stepped out onto the busy city sidewalk. I breathed in the cold winter air. I had spent my whole life acting as their shield. It was incredibly liberating to finally forge my own armor. January 3rd brought the desperation I had been waiting for. With their phone numbers blocked and my financial accounts locked down, my family was running out of avenues to reach me. So, they escalated to the one place they knew I could not hide, my workplace. I work on the 14th floor of a sleek, glass and steel corporate high-rise in the financial district. It is a professional, sterile environment where composure is everything. At around 11 a.m, my desk phone buzzed. It was the building's front lobby security desk. Miss Prescott? We have a situation down here, the security guard said, his tone a mix of annoyance and professional caution. There is a gentleman in the lobby claiming to be your brother. He does not have an appointment, he is refusing to leave the security turnstiles, and, frankly, he is making quite a scene. A wave of hot humiliation washed over my face. I stood up, walked out of my cubicle, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. When the elevator doors slid open to the expansive marble lobby, I saw him immediately. Julian was standing near the visitor check-in desk. He looked atrocious. His hair was unwashed, he was wearing a wrinkled designer hoodie, and he was physically leaning over the security console, pleading with the guard. Several executives in sharp suits were actively stepping around him, casting judgmental glances. I just need to see my sister. It is a family emergency, please, you have to let me up. Julian wailed. He wasn't just talking. He was projecting his voice so the entire lobby could hear the tragedy of his existence. The old Nadine, the one who existed 3 days ago, would have sprinted over to him. I would have grabbed his arm, hushed him, apologized profusely to the security guards, and dragged him to the nearest coffee shop to buy his silence with whatever check he needed. The fear of public embarrassment used to be the tightest leash my family had on me. But as I stood there watching a 28-year-old man throw a calculated toddler tantrum in a corporate lobby, I felt absolutely nothing but second-hand embarrassment. The leash was gone. I walked over slowly, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Julian saw me and immediately rushed forward, his face contorting into an expression of desperate relief. Nadine. Oh my God, finally. You have to talk to me. Mom is losing her mind. The bank called my landlord. He reached out to grab my arm. I took a very deliberate step backward, putting myself out of his reach. I looked at the security guard. Is this man causing a disturbance? I asked the guard, keeping my voice loud enough for Julian to hear, but perfectly calm. The guard looked surprised. Yes, ma'am. He has been shouting for 10 minutes. Julian's mouth dropped open. Nadine, what are you doing? It is me. We need to go somewhere and talk about the loan. I looked Julian dead in the eyes. I didn't see my little brother. I saw a parasite panicking because the host had finally built an antibody. I do not have a brother, I said clearly, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. I do not know this person. He is trespassing. Julian recoiled as if I had physically struck him across the face. Are you insane? You are embarrassing me in front of all these people. The sheer irony of that statement almost made me laugh. Security, I said, turning back to the desk. Please escort this individual out of the building. If he returns, call the police. Nadine, you cannot do this. Julian shrieked, his voice cracking as 2 large security guards flanked him. Dad is going to destroy you for this. You are ruining my life. I turned my back on him and walked toward the elevator banks. I did not look over my shoulder as the guards physically guided his flailing body out through the revolving glass doors. I pressed the button for the 14th floor, stepped inside the carriage, and watched the lobby disappear as the doors closed. I had survived the public ambush. But I knew this was just the appetizer. My father's main event was still coming. The summons arrived via certified mail the next morning, January 4th. It was a single sheet of heavy cardstock from my father, demanding my presence at the family home at 7 in the evening. The letter stated that if I did not attend, I would be legally and socially severed from the Prescott family forever. It was an empty threat. I had already severed myself. But I decided to go. Not to apologize. Not to negotiate. I went because I needed to watch the illusion burn to the ground. I drove back to the suburbs, pulling my Civic up to the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The driveway was packed with cars. It wasn't just my parents' vehicles. I recognized my uncle's SUV, Aunt Sylvia's convertible, and several cars belonging to my cousins. This was not a meeting. It was a tribunal. My parents had called in the extended family to act as a jury, using the sheer weight of numbers to bully me into submission. I walked up to the front door and let myself in. The house smelled of cheap wine and expensive cologne. The dull murmur of 20 voices went completely silent the second my boots stepped onto the hardwood floor of the living room. It was a perfectly staged scene. My mother was sitting in the center of the large leather sectional, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch. Julian was sitting on a footstool beside her, staring at his shoes, the very picture of a broken, humble young man. The rest of the family, aunts, uncles, cousins, were arranged around the room, their faces set in grim, judgmental expressions. My father was standing by the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantel. He looked like a judge about to deliver a death sentence. "You decided to show up," my father said, his voice dripping with icy formality. He did not call me by my name. "I was invited," I replied smoothly, remaining standing near the entrance of the room. I kept my winter coat on. "We are concerned about Nadine's recent behavior," my father announced to the room, addressing them instead of me. "As a family, we pride ourselves on loyalty, on lifting each other up. But Nadine has chosen a path of extreme selfishness. She has chosen to abandon her brother during the most fragile time of his life." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Aunt Sylvia shook her head in exaggerated disgust. Someone in the back, one of my cousins, whispered the word ungrateful. "After everything we have done for her," my father continued, his voice rising in volume. "After we paid for her life, after we supported her career, she turns her back on us over a simple request for temporary assistance." It was breathtaking. The absolute, unashamed rewriting of history. They were painting me as a wealthy, greedy villain who was letting her poor family starve. They completely erased the $120,000. They erased my student loans. They erased the fact that the temporary assistance was an $80,000 sinkhole. I took a step forward, opening my mouth to speak. Immediately, my mother raised her hand, silencing me with a sharp glare. "This is not a debate, Nadine," she said, her voice trembling with fake sorrow. "This is about accountability. You need to look your family in the eyes and explain why your bank account is more important than your brother's survival." That was the moment. The exact second that any lingering shred of familial obligation I had left withered and died. They were not my family. They were a cult, and my father was the high priest of appearances. They were fully prepared to sacrifice my future on the altar of their public image, and they expected me to hand over the knife. I felt my face heat up, but not from fear or shame. It was the heat of pure, unfiltered vindication. I did not need to shout. I did not need to cry. I had something much more powerful than emotion. I had receipts. Accountability. I repeated the word slowly, letting it echo in the suffocating quiet of the living room. "That is a fantastic word, Mom. Let us talk about accountability." I unzipped the heavy leather tote bag hanging from my shoulder. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of manila folders. I had spent 2 hours at the local print shop that afternoon. There were 20 folders in total, professionally bound. I walked over to Aunt Sylvia first and dropped a folder directly onto her lap. Then I moved to my uncle. Then my cousins. I walked around the room in absolute silence, distributing the folders until every single judgmental relative held one in their hands. I kept the last two for my parents, tossing them onto the coffee table in front of the sectional. "What is this garbage?" my father demanded, staring at the folder like it was a live grenade. "That is my accountability," I said, stepping back to the center of the room. "Since we are making family finances a public discussion tonight, I figured everyone should have the accurate numbers." "Go ahead. Open them." Aunt Sylvia was the first to break the seal. She flipped the cover open. Her eyes immediately widened. "Page 1 is a spreadsheet," I narrated calmly, my voice ringing clear across the room. "It details exactly $124,600. That is the total amount of my personal income have transferred to Richard, Margaret, and Julian over the last 7 years. You will see the $15,000 I paid for Julian's legal fees 3 years ago to keep his driving under the influence charge out of the local papers. You will see the multiple rent bailouts. You will see the payments for his failed life coaching business." The room was dead silent except for the sound of 20 people simultaneously flipping pages. Julian had gone completely white. He looked like he was going to vomit. My mother was staring at me, her jaw slightly slack, the tissue forgotten in her hand. "Page 4, I continued, pacing slowly, "is a copy of Julian's business expenses for his gym. You will notice that before he bought a single dumbbell, he leased a $65,000 sports car through the business account. That is why he is $80,000 in debt. Not the economy. A sports car." My uncle let out a low whistle, looking up from the folder to glare at Julian. "And finally," I said, turning to look directly at my father. "Turn to the very last page." My father did not move. He was glaring at me with a hatred so pure it practically vibrated in the air. Aunt Sylvia turned to the last page and gasped loudly. "That is a copy of a cease and desist letter drafted by my attorney," I said, making sure my voice carried to the back of the room. "It was sent to Richard Prescott this morning. It warns him that if he attempts to forge my signature on the loan transfer documents he tried to force on me on New Year's Eve, he will be prosecuted for felony fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heavy, crushing silence of an illusion shattering into a million pieces. The relatives who had been whispering selfish 5 minutes ago were now staring at my parents in horror. I had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of their country club reputation. "You are a monster," my mother whispered, her voice shaking with genuine venom. "No," I replied, pulling my coat tighter around myself. "I am just the accountant. You wanted a public trial. You got one. The bank is officially closed." I turned my back on the 20 stunned faces. I walked down the hallway, opened the heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the freezing night. Behind me, I could hear the first shouts of outrage erupting in the living room as my uncle began demanding answers from my father. I walked to my car, got in, and drove away. I never looked in the rearview mirror. The fallout was spectacular, and it happened almost entirely without my involvement. By mid-January, the house of cards collapsed under its own weight. I heard about the destruction through the family grapevine. A cousin who worked in real estate texted me the details. Without my savings to act as a buffer, Julian's creditors moved in quickly. He defaulted on the commercial lease. The bank repossessed his gym equipment, and more embarrassingly, they repossessed the luxury sports car right out of my parents' suburban driveway in broad daylight. Julian was forced to file for bankruptcy. The pristine, successful image my parents had spent decades cultivating in their neighborhood was reduced to neighborhood gossip. My father had to resign from the country club board of directors to avoid the whispers. They tried to contact me, of course. When their anger burned out and the reality of their financial situation set in, the panic took over. They tried emailing me from new accounts. They tried sending letters to my office. They all went straight into the trash unread. The final confrontation happened on a bleak Tuesday evening in late January. I was cooking dinner in my apartment when the security intercom buzzed. It wasn't my mother demanding entry this time. The doorman called up directly. "Miss Prescott, your parents are in the lobby. They're asking if you could please come down for just 5 minutes. They said it is an emergency." I turned off the stove. I walked down to the lobby. They were standing near the revolving doors, looking out into the cold street. They looked terrible. In just 3 weeks, my father seemed to have aged 10 years. His posture, usually so rigid and proud, was slumped. My mother was not wearing her expensive jewelry. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy. When they saw me step out of the elevator, my father took a step forward, taking off his hat. "Nadine," he said, his voice stripped of all its usual authority. It was small, desperate. "Thank you for coming down." I stood 5 feet away from them, my arms crossed. "You have 2 minutes. What do you want?" My mother started to cry, genuine tears this time. "We are losing the house, Nadine. Julian's bankruptcy. There were clauses. Your father co-signed some of his earlier loans. The creditors are coming after our equity. We have to list the house next week if we cannot come up with $30,000. She looked at me, her eyes begging. For a split second, the ghost of the obedient daughter flared up inside me. $30,000. I had that in my emergency fund. I could write a check right now and save them from the ultimate humiliation of losing their home. But then I remembered the manila folder on the dining room table. I remembered the words, "Say no and you are disowned." I remembered the forged signature trap. They didn't love me. They were just out of ammunition. "I am sorry to hear that," I said. My voice was perfectly flat. My father stared at me, his eyes widening in disbelief. "That is it? You are sorry? Nadine, we will be homeless. Your brother is living in our basement. We need you." "You do not need me," I corrected him. "You need a bank. And I am no longer operating as one. You made choices to protect Julian from reality. Now reality has arrived. I suggest you call a real estate agent." My father's face hardened, a flash of the old arrogance returning. "So this is it. After everything, you are just walking away from your own flesh and blood." I looked at the 2 people who had drained my youth, my finances, and my peace of mind. "No," I said calmly. "I am finally walking forward." I turned around and walked back to the elevators. I heard my mother sob, but I didn't stop. The doors slid closed, shutting them out of my life forever. It has been exactly 1 month since that New Year's Eve dinner. I am standing in my apartment, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling window at the city's skyline. It is a Friday night. The city below is a river of headlights and neon signs, moving fast, completely indifferent to the drama of the people living inside it. The apartment is quiet. It is a clean, honest kind of quiet. There are no frantic text messages lighting up my phone. There are no surprise visits from a mother demanding my savings. There are no therapy speak voicemails from a brother trying to extort me. I walked over to my kitchen island and poured myself a glass of red wine. I thought about the word my family used so often to describe me over the last few weeks. Selfish. For years, that word terrified me. Society teaches women, especially oldest daughters, that our worth is measured by how much of ourselves we are willing to set on fire to keep others warm. We are taught that boundaries are an act of aggression, and that saying no to family is the ultimate sin. My parents weaponized my empathy. They turned my reliability into a liability. But as I stand here, looking at my bank accounts that are finally growing instead of shrinking, looking at the peaceful life I have built with my own 2 hands, I realize something fundamental. They were wrong. Choosing my own financial survival over my brother's reckless entitlement did not make me a monster. Refusing to let my father forge my name on a loan did not make me cruel. Protecting my future from people who only saw me as a resource was not a betrayal. It was self-defense. I raised my wine glass to my reflection in the dark window. I thought about the toast my father forced upon me 30 days ago. I thought about the threat dressed up as family duty. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace settle into my bones. To endings, I whispered to the empty room. And to never confusing love with control ever again. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted incredible. The year had started with an explosive silence, a silence born of shock and manipulation. But tonight, the silence in my apartment belonged entirely to me. I had burned the bridge to my family, and I used the fire to light my own way forward. I built my life back, brick by brick, without them. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the absolute bridge I burned. So, tell me, Am I the jerk for letting my family's financial house of cards completely collapse? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button, leave your verdict in the comments below, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. See you in the next video.